This is Gina Versa from the Waffle Press movie podcast. I'm joined with my co-host Diego Crespo.
Hello, everyone.
And with us is a guest. We haven't had a guest in a little bit, but joining us tonight is Douglas Pipes, composer of Krampus, Trick or Treat, and a small film I worked on, Awaken the Shadow Man. Thanks for joining us tonight, Doug. How are you doing?
Great. How are you guys?
I'm doing good, doing good. Yeah, we met at a few film festivals for Shadow Man, and it was always great talking to you, and it was such a great experience on that film, and it's really cool to have you on to talk about music. So just jumping right into it, Doug. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, how you got started in scoring films?
Yeah, so I'm a LA area native. I grew up a little bit south here, pretty close to Disneyland, actually. And I started out playing music in bands. I grew up playing music. And while I was in a band, I was approached to score an independent film. And I really liked it. And I got a couple more indie films from that. Really enjoyed it, but didn't feel like I was quite the composer I wanted to be because listening to my scores for those films compared to the scores that I really liked, I didn't think I was to the proper level. So I stopped and went to school, went to university to study orchestration and composition. Not for film scoring, just orchestral and conducting, orchestration, and writing. So I got a degree in music, and while I was doing that, I started back up scoring student films, and I met Gil Kennan, a student at UCLA at the time, and worked on his student films. He got a gig after he graduated. His master's thesis kind of got passed around to short film, and he got signed on to do the Spielberg Zemeckis produced Monster House, and he was able to bring me along as his composer, and that was the first thing that I had done on a grand scale, and from there, that's kind of what got the ball rolling.
Yeah. What backpedaling for a bit? What was the band that you were in? I'm just curious.
Oh, just local bands. We never got to the point where we put anything out that had any traction.
And were you guys a specific genre?
I guess you would say, sort of alternative rock. I was the keyboard player. So I played keyboards and piano and sang and wrote songs, and but it became, the allure of composing for film is that you're your own schedule, so you can be as committed to it or uncommitted as you want. And I tend to be obsessive and work 18-hour days and all that kind of stuff. So it suited me well.
18-hour days. You're a hard worker, my friend. That is very impressive.
Every composer works 18-hour days when they're on a film. Trust me. That's not unique. That's every composer's. In fact, 18 might be a short day on some projects. There are some days where you're hoping to get 4 hours sleep.
That's very interesting. I'm a big Alien fan, and Aliens, even Alien 3, which I know might be divisive, but I'm familiar with Jerry Goldsmith, and it's gonna kill me. Who scored Aliens? Was Goldsmith or
Aliens was James Horner. Yeah, James Horner.
And Jerry Goldsmith scored that.
Yeah, I remember James Horner was almost fired because he couldn't figure out how to. He hadn't worked on a production of that size for Aliens, and so I remember stories about him and James Cameron almost having a falling out after that, because it was just such a vastly different experience that he wasn't used to. But speaking of different film flavors, I guess we could call them, you worked on The Babysitter, directed by McG, and you've done projects with Michael Dougherty for years now. The last one, I believe, was Krampus. What's it like working with two filmmakers on two totally different budget sizes?
Yeah, budget size kind of just gives you sort of it sort of tells you what your palette of that you get to work with is. So obviously, the bigger the budget. The first film I did, Monster House, the first studio film, I got to use an 85-piece orchestra, and I had basically all the resources. The studio gave me anything I needed because that was such a big budgeted project. And when the budget gets tighter, you just have to figure out ways to either, if you're going to use a full orchestra, how to maximize your time. And then if you're not going to use a full orchestra because you don't have enough budget for that, then you just, figure out what sort of instrumentation and palette you have. And not all scores obviously call for a big budget approach, but that just sort of indicates what you have at your disposal. But the music, at the core of it, you're writing music that you want to be effective. And the film budget itself usually dictates its own needs, meaning if someone's creating a film with no money that requires an orchestral score, well, now there's a problem. It doesn't really work that way. So, the nature of the film often dictates the budget for the score.
Right. Like I'm sure, something like Halloween, it would be a smaller sort of orchestra to it, as opposed to Avatar or something.
Yeah, the big Marvel movies aren't done on a shoestring budget, and it would be kind of weird if they were not given the resources to pull them off, but they are. So
yeah. Let's talk a little bit about horror film scores. Halloween, Rosemary's Baby, and even Exorcist, where they reused Tubular Bells to appropriate for their film. What is it in using music to create these scares that you could give us some insight into, Doug?
I think those scores that you talked about, I come from the school that is horror scores that are melodic and musical and aren't trying to be sound effect scores can be quite effective. Not to say that you can't have a sound effecty type score and be effective and be very visceral and whatnot, but those specific scores that you're talking about and why they work, the dynamics of them and their ability to have music sort of help tell the narrative, and also they're not always trying to be horror scores, so that when they are being horrific, and an example I use all the time is Poltergeist, which is the score itself is a lot of fantasy, and Carol Ann's theme is a lullaby. It has such a range of dynamics that when the craziness sets in, it's that much more effective, because you do have the sense of being lulled into something and then it hits you harder. If everything is sort of the same tone, it loses a little bit of its effect over the course of 90 minutes or 2 hours.
Yeah, it needs to have some warmth in it, I could imagine.
Yeah, and there need to be dynamics and space and differences of effect for each one to play as strongly in their appropriate uses.
To me, It Follows had some themes early on that really gave the central characters some like compassion that you could attach yourselves to them.
I really enjoyed It Follows. I thought that was great movie, well done, great score.
Yeah.
Another movie that people really enjoy is Michael Dougherty and Your Trick or Treat, which, not that it had trouble finding an audience, it just had a little trouble finding distribution, tragically, early in its run. But can you talk a little bit about what it's like to watch that film finally find its audience, and everyone who watches it pretty much just comes away talking about it nonstop, especially big horror fans who recommend it to everyone specifically around this time of year, Halloween. What's it like to see that grow?
I have to say it's actually quite an honor to be a part of something that has had such a strong growing reception, and people have such a strong bond with it. You know, people love Halloween, and really, for a lot of people, this movie speaks to them. Pretty honored to be part of that process. You know, when it came out, or when it was supposed to come out in 2007, it was set to be released, and then they held it back. They just didn't feel like I'm not sure exactly why. I don't know the answers, but it didn't come out until 2009 on DVD. But it had played in a couple festivals and here and there, and at Comic-Con, and the reception was always really positive. So when it came out on DVD, it just started building this sort of ground swell of attention, and it keeps growing. And it seems like even this year, it's more than it was last year, and it keeps growing and growing. So it's pretty exciting to see, and people have really embraced the character Sam, and yeah, it's really something special to see it keep growing and becoming. Hearing people say that it's on their list of must-sees at every Halloween.
I was gonna say it kicked off a little cinematic universe with it and with Trick or Treat and Krampus.
Yeah.
What about we were talking a little bit about Universal Horror Nights, and Trick or Treat is a feature there. You said that you got to visit the haunt, Doug?
Yeah, so we there was an opening night party, and we got to go through it. Michael and some of the other filmmakers, we all went through it, and then I went back last weekend with my family. But that's having not got to visit the set. It was filmed in Vancouver, and I was brought on in post, so it was already filmed by the time I came on board. So there was something nice about seeing the recreations, a little bit of the different sets, and walking through it, and just to see people line up to see it. It's humbling, and it's an honor to be a part of something that's become what it has become. It's really fun to see, and they did one. They did like a scare zone last year at Orlando, where they had an outside one, and I didn't get to go there, but I saw videos of it, and they play the music, and it has the whole atmosphere, and people are dressed up as the characters, and they even did Halloween Horror Nights did a Krampus one a couple years ago, and that was pretty special to see as well.
Yeah, no, it's like a mini monument to this film almost.
Yeah.
Changing gears here, let's talk a little bit about the vinyl release of Krampus and Trick or Treat through Waxworks. They've been doing some really great work in bringing a lot of film scores to vinyl, releasing it through there. How's that feel, Doug?
Oh, that was a dream come true. I think Kevin over at Waxwork reached out to Michael maybe late 2013 or early 2014, and they, when I heard they were putting out this double release, I was ecstatic, as you can imagine, to have your score put out on vinyl. It was one of their earlier releases, but it went, and the first release sold out, and they repressed it, so now they have a second pressing of the picture discs, and yeah, just having as you can imagine, a composer having scores on vinyl and on CD is very it's very special.
Oh, of course, yeah. No, congratulations. And I was gonna say it's the last cultural experience is listening to a vinyl record as well.
Yeah, it's fun to see people buy vinyl records and post pictures of them or little videos playing the music, and people have little shrines around their record players to their favorite vinyl that they're playing. It's a much more personal experience. You get to sort of experience people's personality a lot more than just by someone forwarding a Spotify playlist.
Oh, yeah.
It's nice to have that sort of communal aspect that's going on with it.
Yeah.
On that note, the next question was going to be if you prefer digital or physical copies for your music, but it sounds like you're pretty high on the physical copies at the moment.
It's nice to have that tactile experience of holding the product, looking at the looking at the artwork, seeing the liner notes, finding out who worked on it, seeing all the credit. Excuse me, the credits. You don't get that with digital. I appreciate that everything's available digitally. It's nice to know that everyone that wants to hear it has access to it. But I am very appreciative of the people that support the companies that invest in producing CDs and vinyl. And in my case, it's been Waxwork doing the vinyl and La La Land Records with the CDs and Perez Sarebound with the Monster House CD.
Yeah. And let's talk a little bit about temp music. Some directors have famously used it to get, everyone uses it to get this idea of how they want their film to work. What is your process in working with temp music, Doug?
Double-edged sword. You hear a temp score, and sometimes you can. It certainly works as great shorthand to get the conversation started, especially just sort of getting the ball rolling. But in the best case scenarios, it's used just in to help sort of frame the cut and get when it's played internally, people can if people are watching the cut internally and there's no music to it, especially not the actual filmmakers, but maybe other people involved in the studio side, it's going to be hard to watch it without music because it will feel flat. So I understand the need for it. So in the best case scenarios, it just becomes shorthand that you can kind of set aside and not worry about. Every once in a while, something gets, there are times when something really is working for the filmmakers and you have to figure out a way to get at what is making it work for them, but still make it your own. That's a challenge that every composer has to come up with. And one of the most rewarding ones is to see a different solution and have that, get that won over by the filmmakers where maybe there's an aspect of bringing out. Nothing can bring out the true characters of a movie like an original score. And so when you are digging deep into this, as you go along, you start to see opportunities. And it always turns this way, that the connective tissue of the different themes and the original score is what brings the movie together. A temp score would never have the same effect. But sometimes there might be an isolated case where something's playing a scene a certain way, and if you approach it in a completely different way because you want to bring out a different emotion or highlight just a different aspect to the scene, sometimes having that and selling that can be really rewarding, because that can be some of the most creative work you do as a composer.
I'm curious, did Michael Dougherty use any temp tracks that stuck out to you in either Krampus or Trick or Treat?
Well, I mean, every film uses temp music, and so yeah, not necessarily that it stuck out, and especially with Krampus, I don't even remember the temp track on Trick or Treat, but I know in Krampus the aside from the temp track, um, that was not going to really be a problem because we knew going into it that everything was going to be every cue was going to have sort of a subtle or overt holiday Christmassy vibe to it. So either through the instrumentation or little fragments of maybe a Christmas melody, that was all going to be in the original score. So there was no way they were going to temp it with that effect. So yeah, I don't think that was ever even everything from that temp score wasn't going to be. It didn't relate to the direction that we were going with ultimately with Krampus. In that regard, but there might be a scene where we tried it with temp music that was at a certain pacing and tried a different I would try a different pacing, or he'd call me up and say, hey, let's try something different than what we have there, and that's when it gets interesting to keep working through all those situations.
Yeah, I'm curious who suggested the for the opening scene for Krampus, I believe it's the song "Happy Holidays" for the opening scene.
So there are music supervisors. I'm not sure exactly who did it. I get a sense it was Michael's choice to have that, but some of the song choices I'm not all of the song choices that were licensed aren't part of my process, and that's normal. Like even on the Babysitter, there's a music supervisor on that, Tracy McKnight, and on Krampus, Peter Afterman. They're helping license the music that is being put into these films, and that's not something that I'm completely focused on the score. So I'm just told, like, I'll see that it's there, and I'm not scoring that scene.
Gotcha.
But it's nice to know what it is, so I know where I'm coming from and where I'm,
Outside of the film itself, when you're scoring it, what would you say is your biggest influence? Would it be the material or other artists whose work you follow that would inspire your creative process?
So I grew up listening to a lot of film music, especially when I was studying to be a composer. Went through a big process on that. But I also attend a lot of concerts and listen to a wide variety of music to keep my musical vocabulary up. And then when I'm working on a film, aside from the main narrative and the acting and the script, just the art direction and the lighting and the colors, that informs a lot of the choices I will make for the instruments I use, the orchestration, whether it's going to be voices or an orchestral instruments or analog synthesizer, all that kind of stuff. It's really informed by all aspects of the film. All aspects.
On that note, what horror film sequence do you think wouldn't have the same impact without a score to support it? Like something like a Halloween.
Swimming scenes in Jaws. I mean.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's great.
That's the shower scene in Psycho is a famous one where, if I understand correctly, Alfred Hitchcock didn't want music there, and Bernard Herrmann said, "No, you got to have music," and he sold him on it. That was going to be done silently, and that was, it wouldn't have worked the way it worked. And I think that goes for most effective scenes. The music is without it, it wouldn't work. Unless it's a well-crafted scene that is meant to be without music, and that was the original intention. And sometimes that is the most effective way to do it.
Right.
But I'm going to assume in most cases where there is score, it's because without score, it wouldn't have worked as well.
Yeah, no. I can't imagine how that shower scene would be without that Bernard Herrmann track. That makes it as emotionally investing as it is in that moment. Doug, could you talk a little bit about any so if you got to score any sort of film outside of anything that you scored before, what would it be?
I'd love to do, like, I have a dream project would be to score a sort of a space sci-fi um, movie, something on a sort of grand fantasy scale. But also on the pet project side, I'm working on a horror fantasy musical. Writing that on my side. That's a sort of slow building process, but something I work on in between other projects.
Yeah.
Early stages still. It's quite an endeavor. So.
Yeah, early scoop.
Yeah. After working on a handful of holiday horror films, do you have a favorite holiday? And if a director came to you to pitch a holiday-themed horror film, what holiday would you want to score next?
I still think there's room for Halloween and Christmas. Those seem to be the best ones. But yeah, at this point in time in the world, I think there's something to be said for scoring a 4th of July movie. And I don't, I'm not being specific to genre, but if you're just going to say Halloween, I think, sort of everyone's pulling on the flag like they own it from all sides. I think there's some material there.
Yeah, no, exactly. Be cathartic, I would imagine.
Maybe that's why I want to do it.
Doug, since you've worked on a Christmas film, do you like Christmas music?
I do like. I'm one of the people that when I start hearing, obviously you don't want to hear Christmas music before Thanksgiving. That's not allowed. But
that should be a rule or something.
But
broadcasting law.
Yeah, but the minute after, whether it's if it's December and I hear Christmas music, I'm in a good mood. Like I'm not I'm not a bah humbug at all. I love it. Yeah. I love embracing it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like being at Disneyland, or it's something euphoric where it gets you happy. Unless it's like the dogs barking a Christmas song, or
maybe not the most novelty versions of Christmas music, but certainly to me the music is the least consumer oriented aspect of Christmas that we still have. So I'll take the music over the early displays of Christmas sales and all that kind of stuff.
Do you is there any one song that comes to mind when you're thinking of Christmas music?
No, I think the one I hear the most in my head is "Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas," but I like all the classics. Silent Night. I like I like it all. I'm not crazy about all the poppy stuff. I do like the sort of nostalgic classic ones.
So obviously not Grandma Got Run Over by a Reindeer or something.
It's not my favorite. Yeah. I mean, I feel sorry for Grandma, but
yeah. Especially not Grandma. I mean, I can't imagine that being anyone's favorite.
All right, Mr. Douglas Pipes, thank you so much for joining us. It was a real honor to have you. And is there anything you could plug up ahead that you'd like people to check out immediately, where can people find you and your work online? And what's the best way to support you?
So you can visit my website at douglaspipes.com. Follow me on Twitter, Douglas Pipes, or Instagram, dpipes. If you want to hear my music, which would be fantastic, vinyl is available at Waxwork Records, CDs at La La Land Records and Varese Saraband. You can also find me on iTunes and Spotify. And the more you support the physical media companies, Waxwork, La La Land, Varese Saraband, the better it is for humanity.